In metaphysics, the concept of nothingness is addressed within a field of thought that transcends the boundaries of the physical world and cannot be explained solely through sensory data. While metaphysics concerns itself with questions such as what being is, how it is possible, and upon which principles it is grounded, nothingness inevitably emerges as a constant companion to these inquiries. For to think about being by its very nature also entails asking what non-being is or what it might mean. In this context, however, nothingness is not treated as a scientific or empirical object, but as a conceptual tool that tests the limits of reason, the capacity for meaning-making, and the furthest points that thought can reach. Within the metaphysical approach, nothingness often functions not as something to be directly defined, but rather as a background that shapes the direction of thought. Every serious inquiry into being inevitably touches upon nothingness. Yet this contact does not aim to objectify nothingness, but rather to clarify more sharply what being itself means. For this reason, in metaphysics, nothingness is not regarded as a simple opposite, but as a boundary point that opens up and deepens meaning. In metaphysical thought, nothingness is generally interpreted not as the direct negation of being, but as the ground that makes its understanding possible. The human mind must distinguish one thing from another in order to grasp it. In this process of differentiation, the idea of what is not sharpens the meaning of what is. In this sense, nothingness clarifies what being is by showing what it is not. However, this opposition is not a symmetrical one. While being generates thought and meaning, nothingness remains at the margins of this production, in a silent and passive position. Nothingness does not create meaning, but it reveals where meaning comes to an end. Some metaphysical approaches reject the idea of nothingness as an independent principle. According to these views, nothingness is not a self-subsisting level of reality, but merely a mental abstraction used to describe situations in which being is absent. In this framework, nothingness has a weak ontological status. Reality is primarily defined in terms of being, while nothingness serves as a conceptual tool that outlines the limits of this definition. Thus, metaphysics aims to construct a coherent and comprehensive explanatory framework by centering being rather than nothingness. This approach adopts a cautious stance toward treating nothingness as if it were a thing. For to reify nothingness is to treat it as a form of being, which leads to a conceptual contradiction. At this point, metaphysics avoids objectifying nothingness and emphasizes instead its purely conceptual function. This function is to clarify the meaning of being and to make the boundaries of thought visible. On the other hand, when nothingness is associated with the concept of potentiality, it acquires a different and more dynamic dimension. The fact that something does not yet exist does not mean that it is impossible. What has not yet been actualized should not be confused with nothingness. In this case, nothingness is interpreted not as absolute emptiness, but as an unrealized possibility. This approach situates nothingness in a passive role and renders it functional for understanding the emergence of being. From this perspective, nothingness is not a rival principle to being, but rather a background that makes its emergence intelligible. Being is not conceived as something that comes out of nothingness. Rather, its meaning is always thought together with the possibility of not being. In this way, metaphysics refrains from absolutizing being and instead approaches it continuously within the context of possibility and actualization. In metaphysical discussions, nothingness is often addressed alongside questions of first cause, origin, and creation. The question, why is there something rather than nothing, is one of the most fundamental and provocative questions of metaphysics. This question does not aim to define nothingness directly, but rather to deepen the meaning of being. Here, nothingness functions not as the object of explanation, but as the necessary background of explanation. This question leads the human mind not only into a theoretical domain, but also into an existential inquiry. For it turns human existence itself into a problem. If nothingness is also possible, then what does it mean to exist? In this context, nothingness serves as a conceptual mirror that enables human beings to question their own existence. In spiritual traditions, The metaphysical understanding of nothingness is closely linked to the acceptance of the limits of human knowledge. When nothingness is regarded as a domain that the human mind cannot directly grasp, this leads one away from dogmatic judgments and toward intellectual humility and a questioning attitude. In this view, nothingness is not a threat, but a field of mystery that deepens consciousness. This approach protects metaphysics from becoming dogmatic. For to confine nothingness within rigid definitions is to render thought closed and inflexible. Metaphysics, by its very nature, is an open-ended field of inquiry. Nothingness functions as a boundary line that preserves this openness. This line both allows thought to advance and teaches at its own limits. In conclusion, in metaphysics, nothingness is not an object to be defined, but a concept that reveals the boundaries of thought. It is not conceived in order to overshadow being, but to grasp more deeply what being truly means. It is not the enemy of meaning, but its horizon. In this sense, the metaphysical understanding of nothingness serves as an essential balancing element in both the rational and spiritual quests of humanity. Nothingness is not a force that destroys thought, but a boundary that sharpens it. Through this boundary, human beings become aware of both what they know and what they cannot know. This awareness serves the fundamental aim of metaphysics, not to provide definitive answers, but to deepen the act of thinking itself.